Welcome to our Natural Habitat Adventures daily dose of nature. We are here to talk to you about how you can create a wildlife habitat in your own backyard. Our presenter today is Brad Joseph, and Brad has been a career naturalist guide with NatHab since 2004. He has a degree in wildlife biology from University of Alaska Fairbanks, and he designs and guides trips all over the world, including Alaska, Borneo, China, Africa, and snow leopard expeditions in India. But today he's coming to us from his home, and I'm going to let him take it from there and tell you where home is and all about why he's so passionate about backyard habitat enhancement. So, Brad, over to you.
Hey, thank you, Leah. I really appreciate that. Hi, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well and hanging in there. It's a beautiful spring day here. I'm coming to you from Arkansas in the Ozarks, and just wanted to take a break from all the other webinars that I do about these crazy places that we won't be able to go in the near future. Borneo, China, all these places. And you guys might wonder, what do I do when I'm not all those places? And I'll show you. Basically, I keep myself very, very busy learning, always learning and trying to focus on the property where I live, and which is an amazing classroom. And so I think that's a good theme for this. Some of you guys aren't going to be able to, shouldn't go on your vacations in the near term. Who knows when you can, but that doesn't mean that you have to stop enjoying and learning about nature. And I think that one of the things that I've been mentioning recently is the virus is a force of Mother Nature. It's a biological thing. It's nature. Nature, it's obviously it controls us, and this is a good reminder that Mother Nature will basically is the boss of humans. We're not as powerful. So something that powerful, I think we should always be reminded to respect it, and that can be respecting nature in beautiful national parks through the world, but really it really starts in your yard. And if everybody out there sort of learns some certain values, and then I think that the world would be a much healthier place, and we would be mentally more healthy. And yeah, so this is just going to be kind of where I live, what I do. And the thing is that I live in a very wild, beautiful place, and you'll see. And all you guys might not live in a place that's that full of nature. So I'm not trying to, kind of brag or anything like that. I'm just showing you the stories and the lessons, how I learned it. And it can also be, a lot of those can all be applied in anywhere in the suburbs or even in urban areas. So we'll just kind of go along and just show you some of the themes and some the ways that you can turn your yard into a beautiful wildlife habitat. And then in doing so, you keep mental health is great. It's such a therapeutic thing to do. It's good for the earth, and you learn a lot. You learn a lot. This has been my classroom. So here's been my lesson for the last 4 years. By the way, we lived in Alaska. My wife and I lived in Alaska for over 20 years. And then we moved down to Arkansas just to get a change for a number of reasons. Long story, but we moved to Arkansas. That may seem like a strange place to live after Alaska, but I think Arkansas is, it's certain regions of it really are America's best kept secret. It's very underrated, and but it is called the natural state for a reason. There's just so many state parks, state forests, beautiful hills, and so here's Arkansas. Okay, well, Texas, you see my mouse. Texas would be here. Oklahoma would be here. Missouri would be here. Louisiana would be just to the south of us, and then we got Tennessee over there and Alabama. So where this is taking place is up in the northern Ozarks, about an hour south of the Missouri border in Marion County, out basically in the middle of nowhere. So luckily, I'm happy to say that there's still no virus cases in this whole county. So it's pretty remote and undeveloped, which is what I love. And the people are wonderful, and it's just a gorgeous place. And we live about 20 minutes from the Buffalo River, which is a famous river that was the first river to be federally protected and one of the most pristine, clean, well-managed bodies of water in the United States, and just fantastic. Anyway, but this is my yard here. I took it a couple days ago. So Arkansas is a karst place, so lots of limestone and a lot of caves, and because of the limestone, okay, I just closed my webcam. Because of the limestone, oops, there's a lot of minerals that precipitate out to make the water very beautiful. And we're lucky enough to live basically in this very wild area. Our neighbors are like miles away. You have to have four-wheel drive to get to our house. So it's definitely remote, and I can hike for forever in either direction and not really see any sign of humans. So I'm deep in the forest, and we're very, very close to the buffalo wilderness area. So anyway, this is a wild place. It's usually wilder than anywhere that I actually lived in Alaska. But we have this beautiful pond down here, and it's in a hollow, kind of what they call a holler, like a small valley. And this is a few days ago. There's gorgeous redbud trees everywhere, and then this beautiful, pristine spring water, which is just kind of a dam that they made a long time ago. I don't know when, I think, but it's a long time ago, and it basically kind of blocks up this creek. This is basically spring fed. So anyway, my point is, and this water eventually goes into the Buffalo River. So we have to be very careful. I'm very careful of anything that we do in our yard, in our house, that we want to take very good care and be very good stewards of this watershed, which isn't just this pond, but it's a beautiful creek, and then it goes into the Buffalo River. So we have to be careful, and we learned a lot of lessons about doing that. So after the pond, where the pond exits, there's a waterfall. So you can see this is what I'm doing when in the warm months, when I'm not looking for brown bears and stuff. Yeah, so this creek is basically draining right out of the pond there. So it's just a very intact, beautiful place, and I think that, when you respect nature and you have places that are truly intact, you'll get good rewards. Like right now is morel season, so it doesn't take me very long. I don't get very bored. I can just wander around looking for mushrooms, which is what I'll be doing about 20 minutes after I finish this webinar. This is in the summertime, and in the summer it's very warm. It almost reminds me of being in Borneo in the summer, because it's so loud with insects and frogs, and it's hot and humid, and I just love it. And I can jump in and swim in any water body, even the spring water stuff, without, like in Alaska, getting hypothermia, which has always been one of my favorite things to do. So it really kind of reminds me of when I grew up in North Carolina. We spent tons of time with my family in the mountains. We lived in Asheville for a while, and swimming in ponds and lakes in the summertime and waterfalls and mountainy areas. It's something that's kind of deep in my blood from when I was little, and hearing the sound of frogs and insects. So I'm not just interested in the giant charismatic stuff. I just have just as much passion and willingness to respect and learn about everything else, that such as just all the amphibians and reptiles. I mean, it's just overwhelming, and the diversity here is fantastic. And I do also want to say, as I'm talking about Arkansas, okay, well, first of all, I'm gonna switch that now. Let's go ahead, and I'll show you a video. It's just kind of a pleasant video of a river otter in my pond there. So you can go ahead and start that video, Lee.
Hey, Brad, back to you.
Okay, great. Well, that was a river otter that was eating crayfish, and Just kind of when he would go underwater, I would get a little closer, and then I would just sit there and be still, and they're pretty used to me. So we've had a whole family of river otters actually there, and we also have beavers that live there. So it's a really, really cool area, and I never get bored here. So when we first moved down here, this was I mean, I have a degree in wildlife from University of Alaska, so I mean, I know the places that I work, and I know the northern boreal forest really, really well. But it was very exciting that in my backyard on my free time, I could just be exposed to such an incredible different ecosystem. That was a total mystery to me. Always learning every day. So what my wife and I did the first winter is we enrolled in this fantastic program that could and should be available in your areas as well. It's called the Master Naturalist Program. So this mine that we area was the North Central Arkansas Master Naturalist, and I'd like to welcome everybody out there who because it was shared through that whole group, and I usually do this talk for them at some point in the springtime, but we're not getting together for this kind of things now. So hello everybody, all the Master Naturalists, and I will admit that the last couple of years I've been so busy with work that we've kind of fallen out on our volunteer hours and stuff. And but just I just wanted to just give a great appreciative shout out to you guys and that whole program of what it did to me. And so hopefully I can put back into the program by doing a talk like this to inspire you guys like you guys inspired me. So what the Master Naturalist Program was a mission statement. I'll let you read it. To develop a corps of well-informed volunteers to provide education, outreach, and service dedicated to the beneficial management of natural resources and natural areas within their communities. So this is focusing on home and wherever you are, learning about it. So basically it's every Saturday through the wintertime, we would go in for, I think it's 8 hours. We'd have basically like an intensive education course. So somebody from the Department of like Fish and Game would come in and talk about invasive species, and somebody would come in and do just all the mammals of Arkansas. Then another bird specialist would come in to learn about birds. We'd have geologists come in. We'd have people that talked a lot about the things that I learned that I'm going to talk about in this talk about how to take care of your property. And then the volunteer programs would be like, for me, would be something like doing a talk like this to them because I was graduated already, and do a stream cleanup, where we go down and we clean a stream up or monitor a stream. You go down with the biologist and we help them figure out all the little, do like surveys of all the micro, the small critters, and make sure that that water's healthy. So we're monitoring things. I mean, there's just dozens and dozens of volunteer programs, and you can just sign up for them. So it's just a really cool thing. So thank you, and I learned so much, and so I want to just pass some of that knowledge on in appreciation to other people. But the thing that I was most captivated with is when I lived in Alaska, the one thing that I missed the most was the sounds at night in the warm season of insects like cicadas and definitely frogs. If I could hear frogs calling, it just did something deep inside me. I just loved it. So I was so happy to get back into frog country. There's a couple species of frogs and toads in Alaska, but they're very rare and you never really hear them. But here, there are 23 different species of frogs and toads in Arkansas. It's like one of the highest, kind of the highest, maybe diversity anywhere, because Arkansas it's got like kind of western species. It's right on the cusp west, it's the Midwest, the prairies, and also like the South. Louisiana is just right down there. So you have just lots and lots of diversity, and it's great for frogs and amphibians because the one thing that this area is really known for is very clean water. There's just no pollution. This is a very, very pristine place, a very pristine watersheds. So what I was most excited about was when the frogs would come out, and I just couldn't wait, especially living next to a big pond. So this guy, the frogman, we call him, Tom Crone, did a whole talk about frogs, and I sort of joined him to that wanted to be my specialty. So I actually do talks like this. And the other thing that we do, so what it is you have to take a class with him and kind of pass, and then you have to learn all the species of frogs and toads by sound. So then once you log into their system, which is called FrogWatch USA, and it's not just Arkansas, there'll be FrogWatch USA programs locally everywhere along the country, is they'll basically teach you how to be a citizen scientist. So you go out and you monitor there's a set way to do it. You have to go to a water body, and then you take all the conditions and you report the different frogs and toads you hear. So if enough people do that for long enough, then you can start seeing trends. If there is say a hog farm or some kind of agricultural thing that's happening, and you're starting to destroy the wetlands, well, these are ways that we can kind of call attention to that through a scientific method. So actually, I'm going to just experiment here if it works. I'm going to go over to illustrate that. I'm going to go over to my internet, and here's the website to the Arkansas Frogs and Toads. And like I said, if you live in South Carolina or you live somewhere else, should have a similar website in your region. And this is where you learn to become a frog specialist. And it's just like people that are bird watchers and know the sounds of birds, you can become frogs, the same thing. And it really adds a lot of dimension and character to the landscape for you if you can go by a creek and you can hear 10 different kinds of frogs and toads calling, and you know which species they are. I love that stuff. Love it. So like here, this is how I learned myself, is basically Tom, the frog man, he put up pictures and the descriptions of the frogs. And if I click on one, it'll play the sound. So it's a lot of frogs and toads to learn, but eventually you hear one, you go back to this, you figure out what it is. Oh, okay, yeah, that's the dwarf American toad. You learn one at a time, and then soon you can be a citizen scientist. So yeah. So again, that's what I do in my free time. Kind of a nature nerd. And why is this important? Well, there's been 200 species of frogs have gone extinct since the 70s and through the world. And why? So these are the things that we need to learn, like what are we doing? So habitat loss is number one. So wetlands been drained, forests where frogs and salamanders live are turned into pavement and neighborhoods. It's pretty obvious. Farmland. So they've lost the habitat. Disease. Animals, just like we do, all get diseases. Some worse than others. The problem is that globalization worsens that spread. So in China, when that disease came out in China, immediately it's in the United States because we have airplanes. Well, the same thing happens with animal diseases. We actually carry these diseases around the world. And while maybe a frog disease in the Amazon, maybe those frogs are an ability to resist it. But if you bring it over to Arkansas, those frogs, their immune system isn't anywhere close to being ready to be used to some kind of a fungus like that. So that's a big problem, diseases. Climate change is huge for amphibians because they're dependent on water. And when climate change is not just about global warming, it's about changing rainy season cycles because the temperatures of the ocean are getting off balance. And as those temperatures change, the currents change, and then so you're getting longer droughts in some places, and it just changes the water balance that these amphibians are dependent on. Yeah, by influencing the reproductive cycles. Predatory invasive species, like there's lots of different invasive fish that we've put in, and they eat frogs, toads, and then their eggs and tadpoles. And commercial trade, that happens a lot in the rest of the world as well, like in Borneo or somewhere where people are trying to catch all these amphibians to sell them as pets, and then they go extinct in the wild. It happens here too, like the horned toad around in this region, extremely endangered because people all want to just catch one and keep it as a pet. It's bad. Be careful with the pet trade. And then food, frog legs. Has a huge, people go out and they over-harvest bullfrogs for the frog legs and green frogs, or they just go out and catch them for bait. So commercial trade also has a problem. And then this is another huge one that I'll talk about. This is kind of the theme of it, is pollution in the air and the water. Yeah. Pollution in the air and the water, it's so bad. Now, this is very controversial, but I will tell you right now, never use Roundup. I don't care if you even have a frog pond or you've never even seen a frog on your yard. That stuff washes into the waterways and the water systems, and it's bad. In Monsanto, it takes in about $1 billion a year. Has got the lawyers, and they also can hire basically scientists to do studies to put out the results that they want to hear. So you can't trust them. And it's just, Monsanto is a whole different talk, but the one thing that you guys need to remember when you click off this talk is don't use Roundup. They may say Roundup is safe for certain animals, and I don't know if it is or not. I don't think it is for even us, but for sure it is unsafe, because the problem with amphibians are going to be the first to die, because their skin is very permeable, because they can breathe underwater with their skin. They can diffuse. So their skin is very permeable. So they are the most sensitive to pollutants. And Roundup's bad. Roundup and that's a herbicide. And I'll talk more about how, if you need to use something like Roundup, like what are some alternative ways for these problems. And that'll be, but this is a big one. I want to hit it right off the bat. And I walk by these in the hardware store and all these different chemicals, and I'm just like, I hope everybody here knows that it may be convenient to use these chemicals, but if you just have some more respect for everything, you look at it, it's just not worth it, even if some of them have been approved for whatever reason. So that is why the amphibians are indicator species. They will be the first guys to start disappearing, showing that you have poisons in your air and the water, because their skin is very permeable. They're very, if you have things that you want to use that say it's safe for fish and mammals, but they don't say amphibians, then don't trust it. And frogs, why do you say frogs? Well, I think they're cool because they're just neat, and I love their calls. But they really are somewhat of a keystone species. They really have they're a base to an ecosystem, a watershed, and for what they control insects is the first thing, and then also they are a prey base for everybody likes to eat frogs. Toads, not so much. I'll talk about why later, but frogs definitely are the main prey for lots of fish, lots of birds, wildcats, raccoons, otters. So really, it's a huge food source, the whole ecosystem. So while all those animals may be able to survive, say Roundup washing into their streams, the frogs can't, and so things begin to get unstable. So they're a keystone species and an indicator species. Okay, so let's do my projects and how I enhance my backyard. So we have a big pond that's full of frogs, but it's kind of far away. But I just wanted to have the most frogs close. So this is our house, and we basically took this, and over several years, and this is like a labor of love and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, we turned it into this, all by ourselves, no landscapers or anything. Just my wife and I's just muscle and researching and reading and just doing what we love. So, and I will tell you, like, this was pretty barren. I mean, there's creatures in the woods, but after this ecosystem was enhanced, things are a whole different ballgame. So, yeah, so this is it. So yeah, we're pretty amazing. And one of the things the neighbors told us, well, you don't want to build something like that too close to your house, because when the frogs get going, you're not going to be able to go outside. And it is true, but I love it. Nothing's too loud for me. I mean, you can hear them. It gets crazy sometimes in the spring and the summer. It already is. They're going. Okay, so here's the site that we decided. So our first step to do this all by ourselves was to basically collect rocks. Now in Arkansas, we were collecting rocks on the road, and somebody pulled over because we were on their property, and I said, hey, we were getting some rocks. Hope you don't mind. And he's like, that don't matter. Arkansas grows rocks. So we have so much amazing rocks to work with. You just go out and there's just rocks for building stones everywhere. So but you don't have to build a frog pond like this. There's so many other ways, but this is how we did it. And I've always loved mason work and stuff. So that's what we did. So this is the place where I wanted to get rid of this giant clump of clay. Well, being kind of a masochist of myself, I tried to dig it myself and haul it with wheelbarrows. And it just was, there's no way. I mean, I could work for 5 or 6 hours. I couldn't walk anymore. Hauling the super heavy clay, didn't even make a dent in it. So finally, I got my buddy, Jerry Killebrew, who's a fishing guide, who lives nearby, to bring his tractor down. And so he dug out big pit, got rid of that thing, and then dug a pit as deep as, so went from there to there. So, and then when we began to build the rock wall up to make it even deeper, because you can't dig too far down here because it's limestone, so there was just not that much dirt available. So anyway, so we did that. We built the rock wall. I pumped out all the water with a transfer pump and dried it out and got as much of that wet clay as I could out of there. And then we had to basically put protective layer, and this looks not so natural, but we just took some recycled kind of astroturf that we found at the dump, some other kind of recycled materials, and we put it down as a basically a protector for the pond line. And that seemed like the easiest way to do it. And so pond liners, there's some cheap stuff and then there's expensive stuff. And if you're wondering, taking notes on how to do this, you definitely want to get the expensive stuff because it lasts a lot longer. Because once you go to all the work of making a pond and then all the animals move in and live there, you don't want it to deteriorate and start leaking. So you want to use the expensive stuff. And there's two different kinds. All this information is on the web. It just takes a lot of research to figure out. So yeah, so we just basically hired, we invited a bunch of friends over, we drank beers, the neighbors, and then we spliced this stuff together and then all spread it out. And then we started to pile the rocks around it and began a water body. So this is just kind of as we fixed it, covering that plastic up slowly but surely with all these rocks that we had broke our backs finding and carrying. Started to take shape, started to come into form. Now any of the stuff that whenever you are dealing with living creatures in a water body that you're helping to manipulate, one of the first things they need is oxygen, dissolved oxygen. That's why you have aerators in your fish tank. So what we did to that, and also because it's cool, was you basically made a waterfall. So we use a water pump, and it was a water pump that we bought at Home Depot. It's made for this. You plug it in, and then there's a hose, and basically recirculates. And the water comes from the pump. And this thing has been amazing. It's been like 4 years and runs constantly, no problems. But you got to put the pump is inside this bag. I just took this picture this morning to show you, because you don't want things to get sucked up into the bag, so you have to have into the pump itself. It'll mess up the impeller. So you basically have like a filter bag. And then the water goes through this pipe that you can see here. You see my mouse. Then it goes underneath the rocks, so we've covered them up, and then pops up over here. And then it was a little tricky, but we built this waterfall, so we get a lot more oxygen. It's pretty, it sounds cool, and then you get more moisture spraying around. We put moss around all these rocks, and it loves it there. We just took moss from other places, so we've got this nice little spot. And I tell you, frogs and salamanders just love that spot now. It used to be nothing, and now it's like it's just a biodiversity hotspot. So that's what we did to get some aeration. And we wanted to make it pretty since it's right next to our house. So we just started doing some kind of landscaping on our own, just building some designs. But you'll see, we just had kind of a logistical problem. You see all that pond liner back there? That's not very, very cool. So we basically turned it into that. I took this picture yesterday. Things are just getting grown in. I don't have any pictures from August, but we planted ferns around there, and it just gets like a little jungle over there for shade tolerant plants. And that's where all the frogs chill out. There's tons of frogs, salamanders, and it's just totally wild and natural over there, and it covered up the pond liner. Yeah, so then we started planting plants and doing our thing, and there's progressing, getting a little bit wilder. I think, yeah, here we go. Just more rock beds. One of the reasons we get lots of rocks is that in Arkansas, when you get rocks, the lizards love rocks, and I think lizards are super cool. I don't have great pictures of our lizards, but there's lots of lizards that live in these rock walls now. So we built a home for so much stuff. And then you have to deal with aquatic plants, and hopefully doing mostly native stuff. And you got to be really careful with invasive aquatic plants like water hyacinth or some of this kind of plants. And if they get into your other water systems, like your nearby lakes and reservoirs and streams, they can have devastating ecological consequences. So it's always better to stay native. And I'll talk more about that with the planting native stuff. But so then as your aquatic plants get in there, then everything starts happening. And a lot of the plants I transferred from our big pond, and that came with them were creatures, snails and all kinds of stuff. And so you're building your own ecosystem that you want to be as natural to the area as possible, but it's just so fulfilling. I can't even tell you, it's one of the most fulfilling things that I've ever done is just take a pile of clay and work on it, and all of a sudden it's just home to all these amazing creatures. And then when the lilies come up and everything. So one of the ways you can do the plants and is these sort of floating pots, and you can, and then in that water, that soil inside the pot stays really wet, and you just pick plants that are really like to grow in a marsh or a bog. They make these little floating islands, and you see frogs love to climb up on these floating islands. And you can put some kind of a creeper in there too, and then that's a floating pot that is grown out now. I think that's creeping Jenny, which I can't remember if that's native or not, but we do use it because it can't get out of this pond area. But it just works really good, and the frogs love it. They don't even know. They just sit there, and then when the plants or their insects come in, and then the frogs can eat, and it's just perfect for them. They love it. Because that's really kind of what you want. Now, this is my favorite thing to put in there, although it does get a bit too warm in the summer for it. But this is something that grows in springs. It's called watercress, and it grows really well, especially when it's cooler. And then also, it's a great thing for us to eat too. So I just transplanted some native watercress, and that's the frog's favorite. So again, there we are, progressing. Lilies, reeds. One of the aquatic plants that we grow there is called American lotus. Now, lotus is a beautiful water plant. Everybody's heard of it. But mostly the lotus that we use and see all over the world is from China. Well, there actually is an American lotus that's native. It's very rare, and once you get it growing, it does really well. And it was for the Native Americans, actually, American lotus was one of their staple foods. And when they would be, the Native Americans, originally were very, very transient, very nomadic, and they would always bring their big root mass of American lotus. And so when they would come into their certain area where they were going to hunt and live for a while, they'd find a water body, put that lotus in there, and then that would be one way they could actually make edible plants out of that. So then you've got this. You want frogs to come. Why do you want frogs to come? Well, they live there. A lot of the frogs live in the water, so you give them a home to live in, such as the green frog and the bullfrog. But all the frogs and toads and salamanders all need a body of water to breed in. So you just kind of wait and hope that they show up. And it's strange. They can hear the water flowing, I guess. I don't know, but they also have some strange way that I'm not truly clear on. I've just heard about it. They can actually detect reflection of water with their eyes from a far distance. So once they find it, then they put it in their mental map. And once they see it, and they're like, wow, could be a great place for, let's say I'm a male frog, I'm going to do my calls. If a female comes up, we can mate, she can lay eggs here, and we'll do well. And then if a female comes in too, she's like, wow, this is great. So she'll remember that and then hit it as one of her spots for the breeding season, because all these animals must breed in the water. So that's what you're really doing for all the habitat, is you're making not only a place for some of the species to live, but a breeding habitat. Because this is the life cycle of a frog. So let's just start out as an adult frog, and it shows up to the breeding area, finds a female. Okay, well, she lays the eggs in the water, usually, almost always in the water. And there'll be an egg sac with the embryo inside and a mucousy protective layer that basically sticks to each other and sticks to plants. And about 10 days or so, a lot of times, depends on the species, but in a couple weeks, the tadpoles will hatch out of these eggs. And then they become, they're herbivorous at first. They basically eat algae. So they really, when you start getting algae growing, when the tadpoles all show up, I mean, they just do a great job controlling that algae. So they just munch on algae. And then the way they breathe is with the external gills in the water. And the tail keeps growing. But then all of a sudden, hind legs appear. So they start becoming a frog. Then they grow lungs. It's such a miracle of amphibians. They grow lungs. And then they basically absorb that tail, have lungs, grow their big legs. They're going to be their locomotion. Then they will climb out of the water, and then they live their life. And the frogs and toads are the same. So yeah, it's pretty neat. So this is a watercress here, and then we started hearing frogs around and seeing them in the water, and that was really great news. And then all of a sudden you'd look one day, and that night, after a warm night in the springtime, you'd start seeing these egg clumps, these masses of eggs. And so you just feel so good that you're basically making a habitat for these guys, these frogs that are so important and lose to the hand of man pretty much at every turn. But you can at least take your free time and give them a helping hand. So what happens is, yeah, so these are just these egg masses. I think those are actually salamander eggs. But okay, so that's frog. Pretty sure those are salamander, but it's hard to tell. And then these are toad. Toads lay eggs in strings like this. So all that vegetation that we planted, that water vegetation, is crucial to have a place for the eggs to sort of adhere to, so they don't just float around all the time. And you need that. And then the tadpoles come out, and then they start munching on algae. Before we had a lot of algae in the pond that first year, I thought they were going to run out of food. So what we would do is we would throw frozen spinach. Apparently they do throw it in there, and they would just flock to it and eat it. And they start growing, growing, growing. And soon you have these little tiny frogs. Like this is a Blanchard's cricket frog, and it takes them several months to get to their full size. But when the tadpoles, the cricket frog tadpoles, when they all hatch, you've just got these little guys everywhere. And just as a reminder, something I'll talk about more, but talk about a great organic way of having insect control in your garden to get rid of all the ticks and the chiggers and all these slugs and things that you might not like. And instead of spraying stuff on it, look at these guys. These guys will take care of it, and they're everywhere because we built a frog pond. There's another Blanchard's cricket frog, tiny guys like the size of your fingernail, but they have a really cool. There's the call. You ever heard that? Sounds like somebody's clinking marbles together in the glass jar. That's the call of the Blanchard's cricket frog. And as the summer progresses, there'll be many different species will be their breeding time. So right now it's spring peepers and leopard frogs, and then later in the hotter part of the summer and later summer you'll get the Blanchard's cricket frog, and you'll get the toads and tree frogs, and anyway, and there's a bunch of species here. But you learn to know the cycle, and it's just kind of a signature to that time of year. Is it early spring or is it late summer when you get the bullfrogs calling? So just adds so much atmosphere to the night sounds hearing these guys. You start getting the big guys coming in. There's bullfrog. Sorry, I'm going to just do that one more time. This is the classic sound of the bullfrog. So bullfrog, everybody loves bullfrogs, right? Bullfrogs are really neat, and they definitely get to be huge, and they're voracious predators. They can eat baby ducks, fish, snakes. I mean, they're like the top dog of. I mean, they're the bull of the frogs. So they can get huge. And so at night, pretty much every night, I'll just do a little night walk around the pond with my light, and I just start to get to know these frogs that are there year after year. Like I recognize some of them. And they get bigger and bigger, and they get used to me coming up with a light. They just realize like, yeah, that it's not going to bother me. They do get used to it, and so sometimes I will throw worms to them. And this is maybe a little bit graphic, but Lee, I'm going to show that bullfrog eating a worm video.
Okay, Brad, back over to you.
Okay. I probably should have told you this before you watched it, but so that's how bullfrog eats. I mean, they just pretty much just anything that fits in their mouth, they just get it in there. And if you noticed that whenever that frog was swallowing, and I can try to play it on my screen and see, it'll be a little bit choppy, but as that frog swallows it, look at his eyes. Watch his eyes. He blinks. You can see he's not scared of me. He's like, yeah, it's just Brad. He blinks and basically jams it. There we go. He blinks really hard and he pops the big eye, which is huge, basically closes it and uses the eyeball to force the food into his mouth. That's pretty neat. This is a bullfrog that I call Jeremiah. He's neat. He just doesn't care. I mean, he just got used to me. He grew up, he was little, and he hangs out in a certain spot. I feed him worms, doesn't hurt anything, and he's a big old boy. So bullfrogs are interesting. So it depends on where you are is whether or not bullfrogs are good, because one of the worst things that we do as humans is introduce invasive species. So it's probably because people like to eat bullfrog legs. Well, some people brought bullfrogs into all the areas that are purple, and these are ecosystems that are not evolved to have bullfrogs to be native like they are in the orange part. And so they basically wipe out and eat all the native frogs, and it really upsets the ecosystem. So bullfrogs, if you're in one of those purple areas, California, any of those areas, and you hear that noise, that's bad, unfortunately. But over in the native area, they're actually kind of endangered because of overharvest, habitat loss, all those things. Because bullfrogs really, I mean, people go out and get the legs too much, and it's unsustainable. It's really easy to get bullfrogs at night and to eat the frog legs. So based on where you are, whether or not bullfrogs are something that you want to have around or don't. And if you ever have a pond in Oregon and you catch a bullfrog, you don't want it there. You want the native species. It's another big one, the bronze or tree frog, or green frog, I'm sorry. It's kind of they used to be different species, but they figured out this the same, it's just different. Here's the noise. So it sounds like somebody's plucking a guitar. That's another big frog. They can be bright green, and I just don't have pictures. I just have pictures of some of the darker variety ones. This is one of my favorites. It's my favorite frog sound. It's the leopard frog. And they live all over the country, even up into Alaska. So that's a leopard frog. These are the big boys. So I wanted to show you, here is, you see this circle down here? That's called the tympanic membrane. And that's how frogs can hear. They have really good hearing, and they can hear each other calling from up to a mile away. And so if you're going to be in the water all the time, ears are kind of a difficult thing. But if you really need to have good hearing, this is basically the tympanic membrane is an eardrum. So that circle right there is their eardrum, but it's on the outside, sealed up so no water gets in. And they can hear, because it's on the outside, they can hear vibrations outside of the water and inside the water. Now this is a toad. This is a dwarf American toad. Now what's the difference between frogs and toads? Toads are very arboreal. Like they breed in the water, but then the rest of their life they spend it in the forest. They have a really bumpy skin. And then another really interesting thing is they've got this bump here. It's called the parotid gland, and it secretes poison. So the toad is not really a great source of food for a lot of creatures because it's poisonous. So if your cat or your dog ever grabs one, they get violently ill for a long, long time. And different toads are poisonous to different degrees. But it's not anything that you want to kill. It just, if you touch it, actually nothing's really in North America are super dangerous to people, but it is a toxin, and that's one of the interesting things about toads, the parotid gland. This is the gray tree frog, and this is a cool way to illustrate this thing here. You guys know this is called the vocal sac, which is a thin membrane of skin, which is kind of at the bottom of its throat, and it's used to amplify the calls. So frogs call to get mates, and they call by exhaling air, and then they use their larynx muscles in their throat to produce a certain sound, and each one has a different sound. The sound is amplified by this vocal sac. So kind of looks like a balloon, and then Leah, I'm going to show the video of the tree frog calling.
Okay, I will bring that up now.
Oh, I'm sorry, no, dwarf American toad.
You want the dwarf?
Dwarf American
yep,
toad.
the dwarf American. Yep, I'll bring that one up.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I think everybody knows the routine by now. This runs for 2 minutes and 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Okay, Brad, I'll turn it back to you. I was just looking at the clock and noticed that we've got so much great information to cover. I'm going to let you keep going. If you can't stay for the full webinar, we will send you a link to the replay. But Brad, we'll turn it back to you so we can continue on.
Okay, so this is a gray tree frog. Tree frogs live up in the trees and you never see them. But in the breeding season, around water bodies, they will come. So this is another really cool one. And just play this one just for maybe 10 seconds.
Okay. All right. So I will bring up the gray tree frog video, and we'll just watch a couple seconds of that, and then we'll go back to Brad. Okay, Brad.
Okay, really quick. Yeah, I mean, I definitely I should have talked faster. But But yeah, I got some really cool information here. So that's how frogs eat, unless they just shove something in their mouth. They can basically lift 1.5 times their body weight with their tongue. And if we had a frog tongue as long as theirs, it would be like could reach our toes, and we could basically pick up a refrigerator with it. It's pretty amazing. And flies, which is what they'll catch. Basically, they're 1 second of our life is 4 seconds for a fly, like the way they can see it. So you can never sneak up on a fly, or that's why it's so hard to swat them. When a frog tongue is built to catch something that's that quick and fast. And so they have these really amazing muscles that basically shoot the tongue out in a spiraling motion like a bullet, and that they're very, very soft and sticky on the outside, so it just envelops the prey, and then it snaps right back in with a different muscle. So there's two different muscles that they have. So they basically can shoot their tongue out and back in at 0.07 seconds. So, but a lot of times they will just basically tackle something, like they did that worm, but they can just jump in and get fish. And the way they do that is with their jumping ability. So frogs just sit and they wait. And a frog, basically, the calf muscle shortens, and it just basically winds up all that power in the tendon, and then it springs the tendon, using the muscle to shorten and store that power, basically like a bow and arrow, and that's why they can jump so incredible. And there's a pickerel frog. So as you got these cool creatures, frogs will definitely attract animals that eat frogs. So you will have predators and just the natural balance of things. And so here's a cool garter snake, totally harmless. I don't know what it had eaten. Hopefully it wasn't one of Jeremiah's buddies, but I'm not sure what it was. But so we definitely have some garter snakes. This is a water snake called the Midland water snake, totally harmless. But they eat frogs and fish, and we do see them sometimes. Unfortunately, they look just enough like a copperhead that most people, especially when they're this brown gold phase, they don't do very well. So yeah, just be careful. Look at that head, how round and narrow it is. That's not a poisonous snake. And snakes are great to have around. I love them. The other thing that we had was one of the snapping turtles, we had a huge snapping turtle in the bottom pond, and it came up and I think it laid eggs. I know it laid eggs in one of our flower beds. So we had all these little guys popping out in our pond. So this is a tiny snapping turtle. This is actually, we had one in there. This is the same one that I just, as we were cleaning the pond out, just found him. So he's obviously doing very well. This was something that wasn't that great. I don't know how it got in there. Maybe some of the vegetation that I was transplanting had a fish egg in it, but this is a sculpin and a huge one. And so what it was doing is basically eating all my tadpoles. So it was really hard to catch him, but I'd go down at night, use the light and the net, and I finally caught him, and then I transplanted him back in the big pond. So I didn't want him to just get enormous eating all my tadpoles. All those logs and everything, this moist environment, plus having a breeding habitat is great for the salamanders, which is another amphibian, which is really cool to have. And this is a cave salamander. This is a black-sided salamander. So when we're turning over rocks and stuff, we have lots of salamanders have showed up, and they would have never had this habitat. So this is the pond just a little while ago. Actually 3 days ago. Look how much crap is in there. That's a really important thing about maintaining the pond. It's a lot of algae has grown up, and there's lots of leaves and stuff from the wintertime. So the last couple days we've been cleaning it out. Now it looks like that. It was a lot of work. We had to drain a lot of water out of it and then scoop all this stuff up, basically by hand, being very careful, just basically taking it out bucket at a time. Very careful to go through. Now we have to do this at a certain time because the frogs, a lot of these frogs will actually estivate or hibernate at the bottom of the pond. They don't move at all, and they just go to sleep. And they're not moving so much that they can actually get enough oxygen through their skin. So we have to be careful to do it when all the big frogs have woken up. And this is free organic material. That's our free fertilizer. It's great stuff. It's all these leaves, because what happens is you get all the leaves that built up, and there's too much organic nutrients in there, so that the slime goes out of control. And what slime does is it basically depletes the oxygen in the pond, especially at night. It actually provides oxygen in the daytime, but at night it keeps breathing, and then just depletes all of the oxygen, and everything basically can die in there. So it's really important. So there's our huge pile of stuff that we pulled out of the pond that we will throw glass clippings on and stuff like that. And that will become our fertilizer. So these are going to be the safe alternatives to doing the things that are going to kill the amphibians and stuff. It's herbicides, pesticides, fertilizer. The fertilizer would be good organic material. When you put too much store-bought fertilizer on stuff, what happens is it's really easy for it to wash into the water system. And when water bodies get too much fertilizer in it, then that's when the algae and all the water bodies get out of hand, and then you run out of your oxygen. And so that basically throws off everything. One of the things that happens, we were using mulch to kind of use instead of herbicides to get rid of all the weeds. So you put mulch down in certain areas, it looks nice. But you got to be very careful is that cedar mulch or mulch that's been treated is poisonous and toxic. A lot of people don't know that. Pesticides and herbicides, there's a lot of really good, so we try to use as little of this as possible as we need to, but sometimes you have a tomato plant and it's getting nailed by these sort of cutworm moths or hornworms or something, and you just want some backup. And here's a great organic way to do this is a neem oil, and neem oil is basically a biopesticide for organic farming, and it comes from an evergreen tree in India, and it's an oil it's toxic to some insects. So we kind of use diluted neem oil to put in certain places where we need it, and it doesn't really hurt anything but certain insects like thrips, whiteflies, mites, fungus gnats, certain beetles. So when we need to use it, but we definitely don't put the poisonous stuff. When we got predation on our garden by more larger animals, one of the things that we use is kind of a cool trick. It's called Repelzol, and it's just kind of like rotten blood, and it stinks. And what it does is any of these herbivores like rabbits and squirrels, it smells like meat, and that's going to attract predators, and so they don't like it. They hate that. And then for some of the other stuff, sulfur is a great way. So there's just so many different ways that if you just dig hard enough, there's thousands that could go onto it for hours and hours about different ways, but there's ways you can avoid using some of these commercial poisons. My favorite exterminator in our yard to control insects, especially when we have a frog pond, are our dragonflies. And the dragonfly, as it's a larva, a nymph is an incredible predator of the mosquito larva, and that's the one thing you need to worry about is mosquitoes. And then when the dragonflies or the damselflies, you can see the difference between the two. They are like the Air Force, the mosquito fighting Air Force. So you got lots of that stuff. Here's my main terminator guy in the garden that I love are the praying mantises. So when you spray too many of these poisons on there to get rid of that's really poisonous, you're gonna basically kill off all the insects, and then you have a very sterile environment, which is tough. So I'd rather have some praying mantises there. So these are just ways to just think about that. Think about it when you're buying those chemicals. Do your research on the web. Talk to people who know. Email me and ask me. And is it okay what you're putting in there? Maybe more convenient, but isn't it cool to go out and see praying mantis in your yard? Now, as far as fertilizer goes, what we do is we put this cow manure or this pond algae, and here to get rid of weeds. In Alaska, what we started using was because in Alaska the weeds were just uncontrollable. Is we started using everything that we wanted to grow in raised beds, like tomatoes and all this, different vegetables. Well, one day I was down at the creek and I saw this crashed canoe, the blue one, and I was like, I don't know where it came from, but I better take this to the dump. It's just ugly. Well, I was like, man, that's a perfect raised bed. So that's what we do. And then I went down to a canoe shop that rents canoes on the Buffalo River, and they've got a bunch of them that people have messed up and they're just sitting there. So I just got this for $20. I got this beautiful red canoe, and now it grows tomatoes. This is before it's grown up. I didn't get a picture of it last summer, but just a cool way. And it also is a much more efficient way to water your stuff. You don't get too much, you're not using too much water because that canoe really holds the water in. Other raised beds that we use are just with rocks. like just like we built the pond, but instead of putting the pond liner down there, we put weed guard, and then we put our good soil, and on top of that, we basically have no weeds. So there's no use for Roundup and stuff. Any place where you are gonna, like a pathway where you want to get rid of the weeds, one great way to do it is go through there with a propane torch. So there's ways around it. So just think before you buy some of these products that they want you to buy it, but they don't care about your watershed. They just care about their corporate profits. And there's some really bad stuff out there. So just think about it. One of the things, the tricks that we finally did was is to be more efficient with our watering and be more conservative, which everybody should do for the health of the planet, is this irrigation system. And they're timers. With the black hose that comes out, and it just drip irrigates wherever you put this hose. And it actually, you just got to look into how you set it up. It wasn't that difficult. But we got it on a timer, and it's so easy. Put the batteries in there. You say, I want to water at 45 minutes every 4 days, or every 6 hours, or every 1 day, and then you just push start, and it just goes on. So you just can really help keep your stuff watered very well. When you're planting your flowers, this is so important. It's planting natives. It's incredibly important, and it's really the whole base of the ecosystem is on these native plants. And natives are better because they're adapted to your spot, so you don't have to water them as much. They're adapted to all the different insects, so you don't need to worry about the pests so much. I mean, they are evolved for your climate. They're not evolved from China, so, or some other place where a lot of these plants come from, or England. So and there's some, if you look and you just do your research of where you live, there's fantastic native plants. And one of the greatest ones is milkweed. And milkweed, you can listen to Court's webinar from a few days ago. We have it recorded, but milkweed is the base of monarchs. Monarchs, first of all, it's beautiful. And when the flowers are there, the monarch butterflies, and as well as many other butterflies, love to eat them. Eat the flowers. I'm sorry, but the nectar of the flowers. But milkweed is the only one where the pupa, the caterpillars of the monarch butterfly, can survive. So without milkweed, your monarchs start to crash. So instead of planting some exotic species that you get at the greenhouse, try milkweed. You can get milkweed seeds, and there's a huge movement, and that is actually what's the key to saving the monarch butterfly. So plant milkweed. Another beautiful natives are like the coneflower or echinacea. So they all have their different pollinators, and when you put on a really flashy, say a butterfly bush that's not native, it will feed the pollinators, but then your native species are basically getting detracted. So they're not getting their pollinators because you've already put stuff instead there. So yeah, it's just there's so many. I mean, this is like would be what I'm talking about is enough material to cover hours and hours and hours of webinars and lectures. But you just have to go and do all your research. This is just the thought process that we all should have in our backyard, and avoid the double composite flowers. First of all, they look weird, but they're basically a genetic mutation where all the reproductive structures of the flower have basically turned into petals instead. So, without going into too much detail, you've got the female structure that takes the pollen and fertilizes the egg in here with the pollen. And you've got the male structure that is producing the pollen. And the reason that works is because you have things like bees coming in, and then they brush by, pick up pollen from here, they deposit pollen from the last flower that they were at, and then it pollinates. And the reason they're doing that is they're going down here for the nectar, which is down here. That's why they're climbing in there and doing that. A double flower, these structures are petals, and they do produce some nectar, but there's no pollination going on. And what happens is you just are attracting these pollinators, and the poor guys are going in, and the petals in the middle are so dense that they can't fit in there. So it really is bad on the pollinator. So avoid the double composite flower. And when you're planting trees, look at the native trees. This is a Mexican plum, it's native. But everybody wants to plant the Bradford pear, which is not native, and it's incredibly invasive. So look at all the beautiful native flowering trees that you have and try to plant those instead. My favorite native plant is the cardinal flower. And these guys are favorites for the hummingbirds. So we've got big patches of cardinal flowers instead of some invasive or and some exotic species. And all the insects, everything is set up for the cardinal flowers. They love it here. They grow well. And I just sit on my porch and can photograph hummingbirds. So we do definitely do some hummingbird feeding, because hummingbirds can run out of gas if if it rains a lot and the flowers aren't doing very well, they can starve to death very quick because their metabolism's so fast. So we definitely do some supplemental feeding for the hummingbird feeders. And when you do that, you got to research how to do it, and you got to keep changing the water out, and it'll get a toxic mold if you just leave it there. But once you get all that figured out, how to do it, it can add so much character and ambiance to your yard is by having hummingbirds coming in. I mean, they're just so fun to watch. These are just pictures I took in my yard. Then other birds, I think bird feeding is a whole separate lecture, but as you have good habitat, you start attracting more birds, like this gorgeous scarlet tanager or summer tanager. And another way to kind of control insects in your trees is by having insectivorous birds that really die off in the wintertime a lot of times. So you have your winter birds, your chickadees, your nuthatches, stuff like that. They basically need to find dormant insects in the barks of trees. Sometimes they can't find a lot. So it's always maybe good to kind of keep those populations up and mitigate some of the stuff that we do to kill birds, like habitat loss. And we put up suet feeders. Bat boxes are another great thing. Bat conservation is really important. A lot of people don't want bats to be roosting in their house or in their attics, but you also want to have bats around because they're a very, very effective controller of insects like mosquitoes. You want bats, so bat boxes are great to put up. Bats are having a tremendous problem now with the white nose syndrome, which is a fungus that when it's spread around, it basically doesn't hurt the bat too much. It just itches so much they can't hibernate. So they keep waking up, scratching their nose, they run out of gas. So bat conservation is a huge thing. These are all things that we covered in our Master Naturalist program. Beavers, some guys might live near places where beavers are, so like we do. And you need to be careful. You want to have beavers around. They create ponds, which is great habitat for water systems and ecosystems, but you have to be careful because they do chew trees down. You might lose your favorite tree. So what we have to do is go out and put cages around the trees that we don't want the beavers to chew. Game cameras are a really neat thing. So, raccoons, and so game cameras, you can set those up and you figure out all the creatures and how they're using your ecosystem. So how do you conserve a place if you don't really know what's going on? So game camera is a really neat thing to do. And then Lee, I was going to play the black bear video.
All right, I'll bring that up. That's a good one.
20 seconds. 20 seconds.
Okay. All right, everybody. So we're going to bring this one up, and I'll play about 20 seconds. That was pretty cool, Brad.
Yeah, so there's black bears in Arkansas. So yeah, game cameras are a great way if you have even just your parks or anywhere, just to set it up and see what happens at night, and you learn. And if you do live with bears in New Jersey, I mean, so many of you guys out there, like I do, have bears around. It's just very important that you kind of follow some protocols about living with bears. When bears eat your bird seed in the summer, if they get into your garbage, your compost piles, they get bad habits, and then usually they become really dangerous and annoying, and then bears will always lose. So you can use things like electric fences around places. If you have bears that are around, instead of shooting them, you can use pepper spray. You can have bear-proof garbage cans. So there's ways to live with bears, and that's very, very important. Okay, so that's the end of the lecture. If you want more of this kind of content, you can always go to my blog. I've got tons and tons of years and years of me writing about animals from here to Africa to China. And oh, I'm sorry, that's my YouTube channel. And all those videos that you just saw, if you want to see them again or see the full version, I've got that plus tons and tons of other videos. It's all wildlife stuff. So if you're looking for something that's instead of CNN, maybe some of my wildlife videos on YouTube. For you kids at home, hopefully there's some kids that are getting homeschooled and trying to maybe watching this for some education. My blog is also good. It's just all educational content about wildlife all over the world. And if you just want a kind of quick wildlife fix, you can follow me on Instagram at Brad Joseph's Photos. Just you can see it's just everything from pandas in China to frogs in my backyard to brown bears, African wildlife, and there's always a conservation message. So that may be something that you guys kind of want to do. And that is my last slide.
That was great, Brad. Thank you. Well, I'm going to just jump right into questions because we do have some. And again, if anyone needs to leave, we will send the link to the replay so that you can refer back to this information. But I want to get to these questions. We have Frances, who lives in New Mexico, and she remarks there's not a lot of water there and not very many frogs. What can she do to improve her backyard habitat? Actually, this is coming from Isaac, who was with Francis. Isaac is 12, so Isaac wants to know how to improve his backyard habitat in New Mexico.
Oh, great question. I think that, to be honest, and I don't mean to offend anybody, but this is just a movement. Is the biggest thing is really that people in the Southwest are doing are like rock gardens with cactuses. So you have basically focusing on not wasting lots and lots of resources on trying to have a lawn. Is just put the native stuff out there. So all the animals, the birds, and there are reptiles there. I'm sure that you have lizards, and there likely are frogs in your region, but they only come out during certain wet times. You could still maybe try to do a small pond. Depends on where you are. But having like rock gardens with cactuses is a great way to kind of improve that habitat, as would be much better than having a lawn. And people do convert over if they're serious about this kind of stuff.
Okay, thanks. Well, you talked about some of your frogs that have names and how you make sure that you're being careful when you're cleaning out your pond in the spring. So how long do frogs live?
Oh, they can actually live. It just depends on some of these like bullfrogs can probably, I don't know, maybe live 4, 5, 6 years or something. So they get bigger and bigger and bigger. Yeah. Some of the smaller ones are going to live less. So it just depends on the species. But yeah, so some of these bigger frogs can live several years, and they just get bigger every so if that makes sense. Yeah. So I just be very careful when you're cleaning the pond out, that you know that those frogs, it's gotten warm enough, all those frogs have woken up. Because to be honest, last year we tried to do it before the big guys woke up, and we were digging through there and actually came upon some estivating frogs on the bottom that were asleep, and they couldn't wake up because it wasn't warm enough. So I had to just bury them again and wait. So once you see them jumping around and stuff like that, then you can kind of dig in there and just carefully take all that stuff out. If you don't take the stuff out, the pond will become basically unusable. It's got so much algae in there that it basically becomes eutrophic or doesn't have enough oxygen. Everything kind of dies.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to combine two questions, one from Susan and one from Teresa. So together, they're interested in attracting frogs to their area. So one case, we're looking to attract male frogs, and then the other, how do you attract frogs to a pond? If you build it, will they just show up, or do you need to introduce them?
That's a really good question. How do you attract frogs? And pretty much what everybody says is if you build it, they will come. And it may take a while. And if you live somewhere like I live, it didn't take long at all. If you build it, they will come. If you live in a place where there's no way frogs are, you live too deep in somewhere, there's just no frogs anywhere close. I haven't really researched it, but I think you can maybe get green frogs and put them in there, and they can live in there. But and it's possible, I haven't tried this, but you might be able to take these frog calls if you wanted to speed the process up, and you have frogs within a mile away, and play these songs on the speaker, and that potentially can attract frogs. But that's a good question. But going out and actually, I got to mention this, if going out to a pond and catching frogs and transplanting them, is from what I've read, doesn't work that great. It stresses them out a lot because they have like a map of where they live kind of in their brain. And so transplanting these guys isn't so good. You know, you might be able to transplant some eggs, but anyway, but if you go to all the research on frog ponds and stuff like that, it's kind of like if you build it, they will come. They just figure out that it's
Okay.
there because they're always traveling around looking for places, and they just show up.
And so in that case, I guess males will just eventually show up. So it's not you can't specify which you attract. So
Yeah, no. If you have one male frog or say a speaker playing, and other males will hear it, and they will come too, thinking, oh, there's a spot there. Somebody thought it was a great place. I'll come too. And then the females will hear that, and they will definitely get attracted to it. Yeah. And then
okay.
the sound, if you have any kind of aerator, pump, waterfall, that sound also can attract them.
All right. Good question. This came up several times. People are wondering if you can suggest a good, safe weed killer.
Oh yes, yes. There's some really good organic vinegar-based weed killers that you can use. And I haven't had to do that, but we mostly use mulch and then our good old-fashioned hands to get rid of the weeds, and then mulch to you know, in our raised beds we have weed guards, so we can kind of control weeds that way. And then again, a propane torch can go along. Like when I had a big garden in Alaska, and I was trying to get rid of a lot of the weeds on the side, I just didn't have time. Is I had a propane torch that I would carry around, and you just sweep it, and then as soon as that flame hits any of those plants, they immediately die. That's a totally clean way to get rid of them. But there are some organic vinegar-based herbicides.
Okay. All right. Last question for you, Brad. Speaking of mulch, could you provide a little more detail on why shredded cedar mulch isn't good, even if it's untreated?
That's a great question. So, you know, it's something that so pretty much my wife bought a bunch of cedar mulch thinking that's fine. The treated mulch is toxic. Like all treated wood is horrible. The dyed stuff, like you gotta stay away from that. But then so basically my wife got all the cedar mulch, put it out there. And then I thought, I don't know if I feel comfortable because, you know, cedar has got basically one of the qualities of cedar is it keeps insects away. So I don't really like this. I don't, and I said, I wonder why. And so I researched it, and sure enough, cedar is toxic to amphibians. And so when you have an amphibian, say in an aquarium, and you don't ever want to get cedar shavings in there. So there's just got a chemical that basically cedar's great because it resists insects and rot. Well, amphibians also don't like it either. There's some that chemical, that toxin it has is bad for them. So what we use is pine, but if you use any kind of like a hardwood like oak or anything, some of these things can be difficult, and you might even have to order it. But it's definitely a big thing on the internet. Luckily, we have the internet, and you can pretty much order anything. So getting really safe mulches, like a pine's okay, pine bark mulch is fine. But cedar's okay, but it's not good for the insects and it's not good for the amphibians.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to stop there. This was a lot of fun. We just learned so much. Thank you, Brad. I agree. I probably could have listened to you for another 3 hours and still been right on the edge of my seat. So let me turn it back to you for closing comments.
Okay. I'm sorry. I think we've lost half of our listeners, but hopefully they can watch it on YouTube or something like that. And I apologize. I'm notorious for talking too much. It's just hard for me to time it. But there's so many different, you know, issues and things that I want to talk so much about. So I could have split this up into 5 webinars. But I thank you guys for listening. I think that if we all just come away from a talk like this on how to be just a little bit more respectful to our yards, and we all do that, then it can have a huge cumulative impact on our watersheds, on our populations of pollinators, or just our general ecosystems. But it really can start right in your yard, and it's just with what decisions you make, what priorities you make. How convenient do you want your weeding to be? Does it really, and how you fertilize and things like that. So there's just some really good lessons that hopefully I inspired you guys with. And even if you can't build a frog pond like I could here and it wouldn't work, that you still are looking at some of the stuff like the native plants and the pollinators and stuff, and what chemicals you're putting into the watershed. And just try to use nature to help us mentally get through this difficult period of time. And I think it can keep us all sane. And then while we do that, we really can learn some great lessons about where we live and how we treat where we live. That's it, guys. Thank you very much. Sorry it was so long.
Well, my thanks as well. And everybody, we've got another one tomorrow, so we hope you will consider coming to our Daily Dose of Nature tomorrow. And we've posted those for next week as well, and you're able to see those on our website, nethab.com. So again, thank you all for being with us today, and we hope you can get out for a few minutes and enjoy your own backyard habitat. So with that, we'll say good day and conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody.